All right, thank you guys. Thank you for joining us today as we're going to talk about the education system, a big topic that I like getting involved with. I think everybody knows who this dude is in the middle here, but for those of you who don't, go buy his books. He's just out there signing them. But Corey's going to tell us who he is quickly, so we're all up to speed on this panel.
Hey guys, I'm DeAngelis. I fight to fund students as opposed to systems, and the liberal media has dubbed me the school choice evangelist. So it's great to be here, and I'm also an anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah.
And Saif and I are busy working on orange pilling Corey just backstage, so we've got some ideas.
We're going to get them.
The introduction here set us up perfectly. People think that the education system is broken. What do you think, Corey?
Oh, it's working just as it was intended to be. I mean, if you read into John Taylor Gatto, you look at Horace Mann, the first education secretary in Massachusetts, actually went over to Prussia in the 1930s to learn how they did it with their compulsory education laws. And the whole point of their system that they brought over here was to create obedient soldiers and obedient factory workers. So when you see that the money poured into the system has increased by 152% since 1970 in the US after adjusting for inflation, and outcomes aren't getting any better, it's because, well, the whole system isn't about education, it's about indoctrination.
Yeah, I mean, if you've used Facebook over the last few years, you've come aware of the fact that if you're getting something for free, you are not the consumer, you are the product. I think that is very true for public education. If you're getting educated for free, your education is not the product that you're getting. You are the product that is being presented to the government as a loyal, brainwashed serf that does what the government says. You wear the mask when they tell you, you take the pharmaceuticals when they tell you, you stay home when they tell you. That's evidence that the public education system is working as intended.
Hey, can I talk? I got to raise my hand. I learned that in the government schools I attended for 13 years. So if I make any mistakes today, it's because I was government educated. Sorry.
Can you go and stand in the corner, please, and be quiet? Now, Saif, does Bitcoin fix the education system?
Yes, I mean, as we know, if it's a problem, Bitcoin fixes it. If Bitcoin can't fix it, then it's not a problem. I mean, I think, honestly, the root of this problem, like the issues of health and so many of the problems that we face in our world today, I would argue, if you read my book, The Fiat Standard, the root of so many of those problems comes down to the fact that a small sector of society can make money without having to work for it, while all the rest of us peons have to work for it. Mm-hmm. And so that gives them an inordinate amount of influence and power over the rest of us. And that means that they can shape things like the education system. We've had a century since the introduction of the central bank around 1914. You see all of these institutions begin to take these terrible turns towards centralization, towards standardization, towards becoming free, in other words, turning the consumer into the product. And we see this is inextricable with the centralization of money and the money going into the hands of government. So I think taking that money away, just a very general, big overview of this issue over decades, taking the power to print money away will take the power to determine what happens with education and force parents to take more charge of their children's education and take away the illusion that you can just outsource the process of education of your children and not have to worry about it. You know, I'm going to go to work, my kids are going to go to school, they're going to come back, they're educated. You can't do that. You can't just outsource it. You can't just trust that people are going to do it, especially if they're doing it for free. That's when your red flags should really rise. I think Bitcoin is going to bring more and more personal responsibility into the process of education, and we see this. If you walk around and talk to Bitcoiners, so many of them question where their kids are educated, so many of them are making new choices, so many of them are homeschooling as well.
Yeah, I think Saif is right here that the government school system is a monopoly that has no incentive to cater to the needs of individual families because of, one, through compulsory property taxes and other forms of taxation, and then also through the residential assignment. Just imagine if you were assigned to your nearest grocery store and you couldn't go anywhere else unless you moved houses to be assigned to another crappy government grocery store. It wouldn't make any sense, but that's how the government school system works today. And underperforming private schools, well, they shut down because families can vote with their feet. Underperforming government schools, they get more money year after year after year. And we saw this with COVID too. I mean, they didn't even open their doors for business. Families were scrambling, seeking for alternatives, private schools or charter schools, or even home-based education options, which is one of the silver linings, actually. Homeschooling has at least doubled, according to Census Bureau data, since the prior to the pandemic. So that's there's been a huge mass exodus from the government school system. Over 1 million students have left the government-run schools relative to pre-pandemic levels, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But as they were closed, they started to get, it was basically a hostage-taking situation. You had the teachers' unions holding children's education hostage to secure multiple multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from the taxpayer, and it worked for them. They received $190 billion in so-called COVID relief since March of 2020. Most of the money hasn't even been spent yet. They didn't need any of it to reopen the schools, but they knew that if they kept their doors closed, they could say, we're failing because we don't have enough money. We are closed because we don't have enough money. And that's because families were held hostage. They have no power in the current system. And the only way out of this mess is from the bottom up, to decentralize power, to give that funding that would normally go to the government schools, over $16,000 per student in the US each year. In New York City, it's over $35,000 per student. That money could go directly to the kids and to let their families dictate where that funding will ultimately end up, in a private school or a charter school, or even to be spent at home-based education. And that's happening right now in the US with something called education savings accounts, which have blossomed over the past few years. So I've really called Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions the school choice advocacy group's biggest partner, because they overplayed their hand and awakened a sleeping giant, parents who want more of a say in their kids' education.
So, education savings accounts, it seems to me, Saif, there's something to be done here with Bitcoin savings technology, education savings account, freeing families and children from the stranglehold of the state education system.
Absolutely. I think it's very telling that one of the most amazing statistics that I've learned from Corey's work is that you look at the average cost of a student at a private school in the US, it's a lot cheaper than the average cost of the students in the public schools. So public schools provide inferior service, but they charge more because they are public bureaucracies. And this is true for pretty much everything. It's the same with healthcare. If you go through the healthcare fiat system, it's very expensive. If you go deal with a doctor directly, like for instance, there's a center called the Oklahoma Surgery Center, they offer surgery for a much lower price because they don't deal with the insurance, they don't deal with any of the regulated fiat industry of insurance. It's just doctor-patient relationship directly, and the hospital taking a small cut in the middle to pay for their services. It turns out to be much cheaper and much more efficient. And we see now in healthcare, we see models like with crowd health, with people moving away from the insurance traditional model to a model of crowdfunding rather than going with classical insurance, because it offers people the incentive to watch out for their health, and it offers people the incentive to save their money. But in order for that to happen, you need to have a form of money that can hold on to its value into the future. You can't have an education savings account or a health savings account. You can't have crowdfunding if you're doing it with what Saylor calls a melting ice cube of money. If it can't last, then it won't last. And for that, you need a form of money that will hold on to its value over time. And so we see this with health, and I think we're going to see it more and more with education. If the money that is going to students is the money that's going to public schools that funds essentially bureaucrats who, as you see, you know, if you hear the horror stories from American public schools, clearly, you know, the average the average public school hire seems to have a lot more on their mind to teach your kids than just arithmetic and algebra and all the things that you actually want. There's all kinds of other stuff that they seem to be very interested in. Why can they do that? Because their financing is unaccountable to the student. If instead of dedicating so much more money to that, you had that money go to the student himself or his parents, and the parents could save that money, well, it doesn't have to go to schooling. Schooling is not that expensive. Schooling should not be this incredibly expensive luxury. It's very cheap to get good teachers to sit and teach kids math and to teach kids to read and write. It's really not that complex. It's not rocket science. Even if it was rocket science, you just hire a rocket scientist. It's a lot less expensive than hiring a rocket scientist through a government bureaucracy. So if that money stays in the hands of students, and students can save it, I think it would be much better. But for that to happen, you need the better money. So I think there's a natural synergy here between homeschoolers and Bitcoiners. As Daniel says, all homeschoolers are just Bitcoiners who don't know it. And I'd say that all Bitcoiners are homeschoolers who don't know. Well, maybe not necessarily homeschoolers, but you should get out of the public funded education system if you've gotten into Bitcoin. I think it's only a matter of time.
Does everybody remember Milton Friedman?
Milton.
So the first wave of school choice was really in the form of a voucher where you can take the money and use it at a private school for tuition and fees. And Saif correctly pointed out that the private school tuition and fees is usually far lower than what they spend in the government schools per student. But the new wave of school choice is these education savings accounts that don't have to only be used at a brick and mortar factory type of school. You can use it for any approved education expenditure. That could be micro schools or home-based education options, like using it for the homeschool curriculum, private tutoring, which allows more of a thousand flowers bloom approach, which can allow for more various types of education providers to sprout up, as opposed to the voucher system where you're still kind of operating within the confines of a brick and mortar type of school. And so you pointed out that the private schools themselves cost a lot less, and how there's a lot of middlemen being cut out of the insurance industries with this other type of approach. With the ESA approach, you can cut out a lot of the administrative cost and fixed cost of building a new brick and mortar school too. So there could be additional savings there with these micro schools that have really sprouted out. There's been this one in particular on my radar called Prenda micro schools, where you get 5 to 10 children together in a household. You can economize on the process of home-based education. You don't have to build a new school. You can do it in the household, hire a private tutor, or even have the parents do it like in a homeschool co-op type of setting. And the Wall Street Journal actually had a headline on this group called "The Teachers Union's Tiny Little Enemy." Why? Because the NEA, the largest labor union in the country, the National Education Association, had a rap sheet on these guys, doing some research on them because they see them as such a threat to the status quo. And I call that a win. Our enemies are afraid.
And that's going to be, that's the worry, I think, Corey, for many people that considering homeschooling. Are the government just going to come in now and try and control that? Are they going to enforce a curriculum at home? What are you doing to fight that narrative?
Yeah, first of all, you got to read the bill. We put specific text in there to say that the government can't control the creed, curriculum, or admissions processes of the private education providers. So that's the first thing. And then two, the government can already regulate private and home education today. So we got to fight against the likelihood of that happening. They've done it before. In Oregon, in 1922, the government outlawed private education in Oregon. Thankfully, in 1925, 3 years later, the Supreme Court thankfully ruled in the majority opinion where they were quoted saying that the child is not the mere creature of the state. Hopefully more people would realize that today, but we fight against the likelihood of that happening with school choice in at least 3 ways. You get people to exit the government school system where they're learning that big government policy is a good thing, where they may end up to vote to regulate private and home education tomorrow, and you make the concept more mainstream. If more people are using home education, the rest of society should be less likely to call to regulate it if it's not some icky thing that only a few people are doing in the corner. And then 3, if you get more people using private and home education, you have a stronger likelihood, a bigger tent, a stronger coalition to fight against those future calls for regulations from authoritarians in power that are already doing it in states like New York. They have the worst homeschooling laws on the books. You have to actually take the state test to prove that you're able to raise your own children at home. That's not because of a school choice program, that's because of authoritarians in government. So we should lock arms, push the best bills that don't have these regulatory strings, and then fight against any introductions or amendments where enemies try to include poison pills in the bills.
I want to come to you, Saif, because you've been inside the belly of the beast. You were 10 years a professor, shilling Keynesian economics.
Yes, guilty as charged.
Do you have anything to say for yourself? But no, truly, in your book, The Fiat Standard, in that chapter, Fiat Education, you completely blew open like the way that the peer reviews work, for example. For those people that aren't, familiar with that, can you just like lift the skirt on what's actually going on?
So Corey's talking about the education at school level, but I think at university we've also have an enormous amount of dysfunction, and if you look at universities today, it's clear that the dysfunction is there, and I think if you understand the economics of it, it becomes very clear why. Again, at university, the student is not really the one that's paying. The payments come from the government. The majority of universities' income comes from government, either in the form of research grants or in the form of loans, subsidized loans to students. So basically universities are politically tied to government because they need to toe the line in order for their programs to be considered legitimate, to get research funding and to get subsidized loans for the student. That's what keeps the entire Ponzi going. And since the money is not coming from the students, the education is increasingly detached from what the students want. That's why people go to university and learn all kinds of irrelevant garbage and spend 4 years and leave with an enormous amount of debt and zero marketable skills. It's because they're not the consumer, they are the product. And in fact, in the case of education, in the case of the education system in particular, it's quite interesting the way that the system has been played out. It isn't the universities so much that have evolved into the parasites that are benefiting from this. It's the academic publishing industry. The academic publishing industry in universities, I'm sure nobody here has ever read an academic journal article. I strongly recommend you never bother.
The reviewers don't even read your article.
Yeah, the reviewers don't read the article. Nobody reads them. The average academic article is read by fewer than 5 people, I think. And there's a very good reason for that. The reason is that research is not written to communicate any ideas. It's to communicate, to jump through. It's just to illustrate that the author can jump through the necessary hoops and can write politically and grammatically correct sentences. That's it. That's all you need to do in order to get published in academia. And as a result of this, the amazing thing is the academic publication industry, they hire the professors to write the articles, to review the articles, to edit the articles, to produce the layouts for the magazines. And then they don't pay the professors who produce that. And then they sell these journals to the universities at insane, exorbitant prices. Tens of thousands of dollars to subscribe to these moronic journals that nobody ever reads. But you have to, if you're a university and if you want to get into the good rankings of the fiat education system, you have to subscribe to more and more of these journals because the rankings are issued by the same scammers in charge of the academic publication industry. So you have to sign up to their stupid Ponzi journals in order for them to give you a good rating. And the stupid professors are out there slaving away, writing these papers all their life. Nobody reads the papers, working for free, and then having their university pay hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to subscribe to these idiotic journals that nobody reads. And then they assign those things to the students so that the students have to jump through the hoops as well to graduate. And that's why you end up with a complete detachment between the useful function of education and the credentialism of these universities. And the good news is, this is a system that is suffocating itself to the point where now credentials are becoming almost negative indication of value. If you wanted to get a job, if you wanted to hire somebody, you want somebody who can do a job. And signing up for $250,000 of debt to learn a bunch of nonsense is a pretty good indicator that you can't do that job. And so,
Corey, let's give the guys some actionable points. If they want to exit the education system, how can they do it? Where is it legal? Where is it not? What can you leave the crowd with?
On the higher education point, let's get the federal government out of the student loan business. And then two, let's defund the universities. There's no reason taxpayers should be paying over $20,000 per student for adults to go jump through these hoops in centers of ideological conformity. It's all it's about. It's not about academic rigor. It's about, do you agree with me? Can you regurgitate the information? It's the same problem at the K-12 level, but it's almost a bigger problem at the higher education level, where the reviewers will say, and I've gotten this on my paper before, that, you know, I agree with you, I think it's, or I agree with the findings, it's rigorous, but why did you ask this research question? It's like, this is not supposed to be the point of academia. But actionable items, look, pull your kids from the government school system. Your kids don't belong to the government. They should not be indoctrinated there for 13 years of their lives. You have the power to do so, and to make it more likely to happen, fight for education savings accounts at the state level to allow the funding to follow the child, to allow for a more of a mass exodus from the system. That'll change the rest of society for years to come.
At a university level, I'd say it's similar. I think the key idea is to stop caring about university credentials, both as an employer, both as an employee. Learn actual useful skills and stop worrying about getting a degree to put on the wall. That doesn't really matter. So look for online education. Everything that is taught at colleges is taught online for free or close to free. I'm going to take this opportunity to shamelessly shill my own website, where you could just sign up and learn economics courses and take university level courses for $100 a year, whereas, you know, you could do something to do the same at a university is much more expensive. We don't give you credentials, we just teach you useful information.
Yeah. Right.
Drop the mic, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
It's great to
Good job, Corey. Thanks so much.
Bitcoiners, welcome back to Bitcoin 2023. This is the Bitcoin Magazine Live Desk, sponsored by Marathon. I am joined by my esteemed panel of Robert Hamilton, the co-founder and CEO of AnchorWatch, Nico Moran, the creator and co-host of Simply Bitcoin, and Alex Gladstein, the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation. We're going to get right into it, gentlemen. Does Bitcoin fix the education system? To you, Nico.
Yeah, 100%. And the reason for that is because for you to actually take self-custody of your Bitcoin, it requires a bit of personal responsibility. And I've seen that transformation with people. As soon as they take self-custody, all of a sudden they start to ask questions about other things, right? And we are here today because people have outsourced that personal responsibility of a bunch of things, whether it's education, whether it's banking, whether it's trusting legacy media institutions. So what my message would be is, it's not about taking the blue pill, it's not about taking the red pill, it's about taking the orange pill. And if you take the orange pill, I think it fixes everything else downstream.
Going to you, Alex. You're in need of a money that will hold its value over time, but in the short term, Bitcoin can obviously go down in fiat terms. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, but is this an issue for developing countries?
Well, I think to tie it to the education piece, even here in the wealthy West, our education system fails miserably to educate people about financial literacy. It's just not there in public schools, private schools, even in universities. It's completely lacking. It's brain dead in some instances. And people grow up, they go out into the world, and they have no idea how to manage credit. They don't really understand long-term savings. And for a lot of people, even here in the West, Bitcoin is helping them. It's helping them ask good questions about how the existing money system works. It's helping them ask questions about what the future is going to be like. It's helping them ask questions about how they can be more responsible for their families and communities. And that's like doubly so in the developing world because there's like way less infrastructure, way less education. So the fact that there's these prolific online resources that are free and open for anybody to learn about Bitcoin from, whether it be podcasts or books, articles, they're translated into all these different languages, just tons of YouTube videos. The amount of free content out there today that you can learn how to be financially free is greater than ever before, and that gives me great hope.
30 seconds to you, Rob. Should people into Bitcoin get out of the public education system?
I personally have strong ambitions of homeschooling my children, and very briefly to tie it back to the previous panel, the media, and recently I very strongly agree with the lockdowns and everything, we really saw that the public education system failed many children. And it's really tragic, and the media now is also participating in trying to rewrite that narrative. But I think ultimately, this talks about the distribution of freedom of information, right? Whether you're talking about the internet, being able to access all of this, being able to use Bitcoin as freedom money, sources of information like Bitcoin Magazine distributing out, great like books and magazines and all the content all the time. It's a really strong way for getting people to think outside of the existing ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to kick it back over to the Nakamoto stage. Remember to hit the like button and smash the subscribe button as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.